Welcome back to the deep dive. If you want a masterclass in, well, economic transformation and cultural resilience, I think you've definitely come to the right place today. We are undertaking a really fascinating deep dive into the history of Chinese settlement in Jamaica. Our mission really is to take this almost unbelievable journey. We're talking about how a small group, initially brought in as plantation laborers, somehow survived systematic exploitation
Yeah, that's quite the story.
and ultimately became absolutely central to the island's economic landscape. They created this, distinct and successful middle class.
It's a story that just perfectly underscores Jamaica's layered identity. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got the legacy of the Tainos, the Spanish, the huge impact of the African population, the English, East Indians, Syrians.
A real mosaic.
Exactly.
Mm.
And within that mosaic, the Chinese experience really stands out. It's such a powerful case study in adaptability.
And we kick off with something that, well, by all official measures at the time, was seen as a complete failure. The very first attempt to establish a Chinese presence in Jamaica, importing them for labor, it was managed so badly, so disastrously, that officials just gave up on the whole idea.
Threw in the towel.
Yeah. But that initial failure, that's actually where this dramatic story of success really begins.
That's the perfect starting point, really. We're talking about the period roughly between, say, 1854 and 1884. Numerically, this was the smallest wave. It was driven entirely by the need for indentured plantation workers after emancipation
Okay.
and the immigrants, overwhelmingly single men.
Right. Let's focus on 1854 for a moment, because the specific arrivals that year, they're kind of shocking when you look at the detail.
They really are.
On July 30th, you have the ship Epsom. It brought the first group, 224 individuals from Hong Kong. That part seems pretty standard for the era, right? The labor import story.
Yeah, that fits the pattern you see elsewhere. But it's the second arrival that year.
Oh.
That's where things get, well, geographically bizarre. In November, 197 people arrive on the ship Vampire. And here's the thing. They weren't even scheduled to go to Jamaica. Not at all.
Wait, really? Where were they headed?
They were part of a bigger group heading to Panama to work on the Panama Railroad construction. Big project at the time.
Okay, so how on earth did they end up in Jamaica instead? That sounds unexpected.
It's just stunning, really.
Yeah.
The Panamanian authorities, they were terrified of yellow fever outbreaks. Absolutely rampant on the isthmus then.
Disease. Okay.
So they basically shipped these Chinese laborers off to Jamaica, essentially traded them.
Traded them for who?
In direct exchange for local Jamaican laborers who they figured were, more accustomed to the disease risk or maybe had some immunity. It's a human trade.
Wow. That's a grim historical footnote, isn't it? Treating people like commodities based on perceived disease resistance.
It really is. And the brutal conditions didn't exactly get better once they landed in Jamaica either.
No, I bet not. They suffered under that indenture system, right? They were promised things like food, shelter, medical care. But the sources make it clear those terms were just constantly violated.
Constantly, yeah. And the work itself.
Yeah.
The 6-day week, 12 hours a day,
Hmm.
often for, about $4? Miserable compensation.
That's incredibly harsh.
When you look at indenture across the Caribbean back then,
Mhm.
it was barely a step above slavery in many ways. Low pay, poor food, widespread prejudice. It led to huge instability. People deserted. There was violence. It was bleak.
And the numbers really show that, don't they? If they started with over 400 people combined in 1854.
Right, from those two ships.
By the time the 1891 census rolls around, there are only 481 Chinese individuals left on the entire island.
Just 481 after
Oh.
decades.
So the colonial administration just washed its hands of it, called the whole program a failed enterprise, and stopped importing Chinese labor.
That's exactly what happened. They abandoned it. But what's so fascinating, what's crucial here, is that the official failure of that labor scheme, it actually creates the space, the vacuum for the economic transformation that comes next.
Right, so we need to focus on those 481 people who remained. How do you go from being an abandoned plantation laborer, part of a failed system, to becoming a respected merchant? That's a huge leap.
It is, and that's the critical pivot point. If they couldn't survive on the plantations, well, they had to carve out their own economic niche, didn't they?
Makes sense.
So by the late 19th century, the few who were left, they started shifting into shopkeeping, small-scale stuff, local grocery retail primarily.
Okay, why groceries specifically?
Well, they likely recognized a need, shops that catered specifically to the needs of the newly emancipated low-wage population, a need that the big colonial trading houses were pretty much ignoring.
Finding a gap in the market.
Exactly. They started small, maybe pooling whatever tiny savings they had, or
Yeah.
perhaps leveraging connections through the existing Chinese diaspora in the region. Somehow, they scraped together that initial capital.
And once that foothold was there, it acted like a magnet, didn't it, for the next generation?
Precisely. A successful shopkeeper could now write back home, maybe to China, maybe elsewhere in the diaspora, and finance the passage for a relative.
But this time, promising a future in commerce, not in the cane fields.
Exactly. And that launches the massive second wave. This runs roughly from, say, 1900 right up to the 1940s.
And this wave was different.
Completely different demographic. This wasn't about imported labor anymore. It was business-driven migration, people coming to set up shop.
And the population numbers reflect that shift dramatically.
Up staggeringly. You go from those 481 people in 1891 to 6,886 by the 1943 census.
Wow, that's a huge jump. Over tenfold.
Massive increase. And the real boom years for that jump were the 1920s and 30s.
There's a specific example that really paints a picture of this commerce focus, right?
Oh.
The ship Georgistan in 1921.
Yes, that's a perfect illustration. The Georgistan arrives carrying 621 Chinese immigrants.
Okay.
And the passenger manifest is just striking. Every single person listed, their occupation is businessman.
Every single one.
Every one. And they already had forwarding addresses listed, established in nearly every parish across Jamaica. They weren't arriving hoping to find work. They were arriving ready to start work. They had a plan.
That's incredible foresight and organization.
It translated very quickly into dominance in the local retail trade. By 1943, you look at the census data again, 64% of Chinese men and 50% of Chinese women listed their main occupation as being related to the grocery trade.
64% of men. That's a huge concentration in one sector.
It really is.
And this is why, as the sources note, that local phrase, going to the Chinaman shop, just became common talk, part of the vernacular. They were everywhere.
Ubiquitous, yeah. But their success wasn't just about being there. It was really about two key business practices, innovations almost, that connected them directly to their local customer base very effectively.
Okay, what were those?
The first one was a willingness to offer credit. Selling on trust, as they call it.
Ah, credit. That must have been huge.
Huge. Think about it. You're dealing with low-wage agricultural workers, people on estates who maybe didn't get paid daily or even weekly sometimes, offering goods on credit until payday. That was a massive social service, not just an economic one.
But surely that was risky. Offering credit in that kind of economy, high risk of people defaulting, wasn't it? How did they manage the potential losses?
That's a fair question. And that's where the second practice, maybe the more famous one, comes in. Brota.
Brota, I've heard that term. It means, like a little extra.
Exactly. Providing a bit extra for free. You buy a pound of flour, the shopkeeper scoops it out and then tosses in an extra handful. You buy sugar, you get a little more.
Okay, so how does giving away free stuff help manage credit risk?
It builds incredible customer loyalty, goodwill, and perhaps more importantly, it builds social collateral. If a customer owed you money, they felt a stronger obligation perhaps to pay you back because you treated them generously. They were less likely to just disappear or go somewhere else.
So it's a combination. The credit makes things possible for the customer, and the Brota builds the relationship and kind of ensures the credit gets repaid eventually.
Pretty much. That combination of credit and generosity, it effectively built this really resilient, customer-focused retail presence, something the bigger, more established colonial merchant houses just couldn't or wouldn't compete with at that local level.
And this success, it wasn't just anecdotal, right? We have actual data showing their economic standing.
We do. The 1942 average earnings data really puts it into perspective. It highlights just how quickly they ascended into what was becoming the island's middle class.
Let's look at those numbers because they are quite striking when you put them side by side. Okay, so by 1942, the average earnings for Chinese individuals, 34.83 shillings per week. Now, they weren't the absolute highest earners. The sources mentioned Syrians were at 54 shillings per week.
Right, Syrians were another important merchant group. But compare the Chinese earnings to the majority populations. That's where you see the real gap.
Exactly. For every shilling earned by a black Jamaican who averaged about 6.16 shillings per week, the average Chinese person was earning nearly 6 times that amount.
6 times. That's significant.
And East Indians average around 10.08 shillings, while those identified as colored in the census averaged 18.16 shillings. So the Chinese community had clearly achieved a distinct economic
A
level.
very distinct level, and quite rapidly considering their starting point.
Now, that kind of economic difference, it must have created some social tensions, surely. But the sources also mention another factor, the English government policy regarding Chinese families. They actively encouraged Chinese women to immigrate. Why was that?
Yeah, that was a specific policy push. It was basically an attempt to influence the rate of intermarriage, or what they called miscegenation back then.
Social engineering.
Sort of. Because so many of the initial male migrants had come alone, or maybe had wives back in China they couldn't bring over yet, they were forming relationships and families with local Jamaican women.
Okay.
The policy was quite explicit: encourage wives in China to join their husbands, or encourage more single Chinese women to immigrate. The idea was to sort of stabilize the male population, keep them within the Chinese community, and reduce the number of mixed unions.
But did it work? I mean, despite that policy push, the mixing was already happening, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The policy didn't really stop it. By the 1943 census, the same one showing the economic data, it also recorded 5,508 children of mixed Chinese heritage on the island.
Over 5,000. So the cultural blending was well underway, regardless of official policy.
Definitely. And what really stands out in this period, especially as Jamaica started to urbanize more around World War II, is this active tension between, on the one hand, economic integration. They were clearly becoming part of the middle class, central to commerce, and on the other hand, a real effort towards cultural retention.
So integrated economically, but maybe not wanting to fully assimilate culturally.
Exactly. They weren't just passively resisting assimilation. They were actively investing in institutions specifically designed to maintain their ethnic identity.
And this is where things like the Chinese Benevolent Association come in.
Precisely. The CBA was founded, and it then went on to establish the Chinese Sanatorium.
A sanatorium, like a hospital.
Yeah, basically offering free medical care, specifically for members of the Chinese community who couldn't afford the regular fees or maybe felt more comfortable in that setting.
Wow. So they were building their own social safety nets?
Completely self-reliant in that sense. Rather than just depending on the public health system, which might have been inadequate or maybe not welcoming, they created their own support structure.
And it wasn't just healthcare, was it? There was also investment in education, but in a very specific way.
Right. Families who had the means, who could afford it, would actually send their children back to China. Not necessarily to live there forever, but specifically for education.
To learn the Chinese way of life.
Exactly. To ensure the younger generation understood the language, the customs, the heritage. It was a very conscious effort to instill that cultural foundation.
So they're saying, effectively, we will succeed in your economy, we'll integrate into your commerce, but we're going to make damn sure our cultural core stays intact.
That's a good way to put it. It's a really remarkable level of strategic cultural investment, especially for an immigrant group that was still relatively new to achieving that kind of middle-class status.
It really is. But what happens over time? Does that connection, that sending children back, does it last?
Well, as you often see with migration stories, over generations, things naturally shift. As the number of descendants born in Jamaica increased, third, fourth generation, and so on, those direct, practical links with China, like sending kids back for school, they naturally started to decline. It just became less common, less feasible, perhaps.
So what does the identity become then for those later generations?
It evolves into that more nuanced Jamaican Chinese identity that's very much present today. The later generations, they naturally absorbed and accepted Jamaican norms and culture as their own. It wasn't foreign to them, it was home.
So they become fully integrated members of Jamaican society.
Fully integrated, yes. But crucially, and this is the key point, from the sources, they didn't necessarily see Jamaican norms as replacing their Chinese heritage. They saw them as complementing it.
So it's an addition, not a substitution.
Exactly. The result is an identity where a strong sense of Chinese ethnicity, of heritage, exists right alongside and comfortably within a fully integrated Jamaican lifestyle and nationality. It became just an integral part of who they were, generation after generation.
So if we just sort of pull back and look at the whole arc of this deep dive,
Yeah.
you've really charted this incredible transformation for us. It starts with those few hundred men tragically caught up in that yellow fever labor exchange.
Yeah, a really grim beginning.
And they become the foundation for a community that eventually comes to dominate local grocery trade, using really specific, smart business innovations like trust and Brada.
It's a really powerful narrative, isn't it? Survival resilience, smart economic thinking, all within a pretty challenging colonial setup.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to maybe chew on after this deep dive wraps up. We've seen how this community achieved really remarkable economic integration, becoming middle-class leaders in Jamaica. But at the same time, they were investing heavily in their own institutions, the Benevolent Association, the sanatorium, sending children abroad for education.
Institutions specifically designed to resist full cultural assimilation, to maintain that distinct identity.
Exactly. So, what does that persistent tension, that drive for economic success within the host society, coupled with active efforts to maintain cultural separation, what does that tell us about the nature of immigrant success and identity? Especially, in societies like Jamaica, defined by these complex layers of colonial history and migration. Something to think about.